Welcome friends. In this video, we will learn about software architecture, what it actually is, how we need to think about abstraction in software architecture. Then we will learn about architectural structures. Then we will learn about system architecture and enterprise architecture and what is the difference. Then we will learn about views as well. We will also see some useful software structures, also see how structures relate to each other. We'll also learn about some commonly used architectural patterns. So let's get started. See, software always exists to support some business, and you can have some goals. For example, you want to increase the efficiency of your software, you want to increase the response time, or you want to improve the performance, you want to improve the user experience. So, all these are a sort of abstract business goals, and architecture is the key which helps you move from these abstract business goals to actual working code. Now, in architecture, there are some known techniques available with the help of which you can design, analyze, and document, which can help you move from your abstract business goals to actual working code. So software architecture is a set of structure that helps you reason about system elements, their relation between each other and their properties. And a structure is just these system elements held together by a relation. Not every structure is architectural. A structure is architectural only if it helps the software stakeholders to reason about what they care. For example, they might care about business functionality or software availability or modifiability or responsiveness. So, whatever the business stakeholders care about, that structure is architectural in nature. So basically, what counts as architectural depends upon your context. So how is architecture an abstraction with behavior? So in modern software, it is very common is to expose an interface dividing public and private parts of your code. So software architecture lives on the public side. Software elements, their arrangement, their interaction with each other, and they are those properties which actually matter to the business stakeholder. Private implementation is not architectural until it drastically affects the reasoning on which your software architecture was built. And yes, behavior of your software is part of architecture to the extent it lets you predict your system behavior and quality attributes. So the bottom line is every system has an architecture. Even if you have not documented it, your system still has an architecture. And software architecture generally relates with the public side of your implementation. So when we want to document our software architecture, we use some known techniques, and one of these techniques is using software structures. So there are three kind of software structures: module structure, component and connector structure, and allocation structure. So the module structure contains static implementation units, for examples classes, layers, features. It is used when you want to define who owns that particular class, who owns that responsibility, which class can use which other class, what actually depends on your class. So this structure is your best friend when you want to reason about modifiability of your system. The second is component and connector structure. It contains about your runtime and events. For example, services, clients, servers, filters, and their interaction with each other. For example, calls, events, pipes, etc. So they are used to answer where your code is executing, where the data is shared, what replicates what runs in parallel. So the component connector structure is used where you analyze performance, security, and availability. Now the third is allocation structure. Contains mapping between the software and the outside world. For example, CPU, networks, file systems, teams, software teams. It is used to answer which process runs on which processor, where your artifacts are stored, which team is building which part. So the allocation view unlocks performance, availability, security, building, code build, and organization alignment. Now let's talk about system architecture and enterprise architecture. System architecture maps functionality to hardware and software and considers human interaction in between. It decides processor assignment, network shape, and how software maps to hardware. It lets you reason about performance and reliability at the system level, and you also reason about power consumption and your physical footprint. The software architect and the system architect negotiate on the terms where functionality lives and what constraints to follow. So basically, a system architect deals with the system and the physical things and the organizational things, and software architecture is more confined towards the software implementation. Now, if we talk about enterprise architecture, it describes the organizational process, information flows, peoples, and subunits aligned to organization strategy. It answers which systems the enterprise should support and how standards govern computing environment. Here, software is only one concern, and the other concern is how humans use these systems and what standards create coherence. Now, we already talked about structures. Let us talk about views. A view is how we represent a given structure to the business stakeholders. So a software architect designs the software structures, and based on those structures the software is implemented. But it is also the role of a software architect to document views for all these structures, and he has to document them carefully using the notation and templates which the readers can reason about the qualities of the system which really matter to the business. So let us discuss about some examples of the module structure, okay, which is kind of static in nature. So one of the module structures is decomposition structure. It breaks the system into submodules recursively until each submodule is understandable and testable. It drives organization, documentation, and integration plans. It also localizes expected changes. So, it is very good for modifiability of your system. Another module structure is the uses module structure. What uses what? Okay. So, if a module uses another module, it requires the correct version of that module. So, this structure captures this strictness. So, this is kind of, central to understanding the impact of your change. If we change this, where all our impact can be and what all should we retest to make sure everything is good. Next comes the layered structure. So in this we define layers: layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and the layer above only uses the layer below, not the subsequent layers. So a layer can only call the layer which is just below it. So this module structure promotes abstraction, portability, and clean separation. Now there is another structure which is called class or generalization structure. So it is built around inheritance, realization, trees, and a family of elements with similar behaviors. This helps us reason about reuse in software and incremental capability of our system. Another useful module structure is the data module. So it takes care about static information entities and their relationship with each other. For example, customer, account, orders, inventory. So it enables consistent domain invariants and shared language between all these modules. Now let's talk about component and connector structures. Before, whatever we talked were all different kinds of module structures. So the first one is services structure. In this we talk about interoperating services which communicate with each other using various protocols like SOAP, REST. It frames service boundaries and message contracts for evolution and integration. Then comes concurrency structure. So this defines logical threads, processes, and their communications. It surfaces parallelism, contention points, and scheduling needs of your system. It is essential for avoiding deadlocks and meeting the latency and throughput goals of your system. So these two were examples of component and connector structures. Now let's talk about allocation structures. It is kind of mapping with the reality. So the first one is deployment structure. So it talks about your processes and how will they run on your processors and the communication link between your processes. So it is very critical for performance, data integrity, security, availability of your system, especially in a distributed system. Second is implementation structure. In this structure your code and your other assets are mapped to directories, repositories, and build pipelines. It is critical for business and release management, and it is a heart of your multi-team development. And the third is work assignment structure. Here teams are mapped to modules and their integration responsibilities as well. It prevents duplicate implementations. it defines a communication pathway between teams. So we talked about many structures. We saw some example for module structures, we saw example for component connector structures, and we also saw example for allocation structure. But how do these structures relate to each other, and why does it matter to understand how these structures relate to each other? See, no structure is independent. For example, a simple two module decomposition, server and client, if you try to visualize it with a component connector structure, it will yield 11 runtime elements. For example, there might be 10 clients all reaching to one server. So in a decomposition structure, there are 2 units, but in a component connector structure, there are 11 units. So you will always use component and connector structures for analyzing bottlenecks, for network planning. Now, since there are different kind of structures, many projects choose one dominant structure. Generally, teams go with module decomposition structure as their dominant structure because it mirrors with your teams and your organization or organizational aspects. But sometimes component and connector structure can also be your dominant software structure. When you care too much about your runtime qualities of your system, then in that case CNC structure can be your dominant structure, module structure can be your secondary, because eventually everything is kind of describing your software system. So you can have many structures for your system, one of them will be the dominant. It is determined by which qualities you care more. If you care more about organization structure, then go for module structure. But if you care more about runtime analysis and runtime distribution, go for component and connector structure. So basically the practical rule is design and document those structures which pay for themselves. How? By reducing your development cost, by reducing your ambiguity in your developer's mind, and by reducing your maintenance cost, by helping you achieve those qualities of the systems that you really care for. And the more bigger your system grows, it will need more different kind of structures to be documented. If it is a relatively smaller system, yeah, a couple of software structures documented is more than enough. So you pick software structures based on the best leverage you get for the qualities that you care the most. Now let's talk about architectural patterns. So one of the pattern is a layered pattern. As we talked about service A, service B, service C, service A can only call service B can only call service C. So this enforces unidirectional use. It creates abstraction, increases portability and clarity. Similarly, we have shared data pattern. In this, we have a central data store with controlled access via some particular defined protocol. For example, a SQL database. It is great for consistency, integration, and it is risky for scalability if misused. Another pattern is client server pattern. So the client makes a request and server provides the information. And how client requests the server, it is based on the connectors, which is the protocol. It encourages clear separation of concerns. Client has different concerns, server has different concerns. It enables scaling and helps us reason about the traffic load. Now there is a multi-layer pattern as well. Here we have a presentation layer, a logical layer, and a data layer, and all are connected with the help of a network. It is specialized for deployment and helps us scale it, and helps us with scaling and security zoning. Another pattern is competence center. Here you route work to teams which are competent with a particular aspect or a particular technology or a particular skill set. For example, we have a team which builds a platform, and then we have other teams which create apps on top of that platform. There is a one team which is managing the platform, and there are 10 other teams which are creating 10 other apps on top of the given platform. Now, what makes a good architecture? Well, there is no universally good architecture at all. There is only architecture which is more or less fit for a specific purpose. So there are two bucket of guidance here. First are some process recommendations, and second is some structural recommendations. So let's talk about some process recommendation first. Architect should always maintain a prioritized list of quality attributes. There should be explicit list. He should also maintain where he can be flexible with some functionalities. and based on this priority of qualities only, he can steer the trade-offs in the system. Third is document with views. Views should be able to document the stakeholders' question on project delivery, project timeline, and these kind of things. Another rule is evaluate early and then re-evaluate, which means if you want to implement something, first do a POC. Try to evaluate how it is for you, and then repeat this for all the majority changes that you will be doing in the system. The fifth is grow incrementally. This means start with a skeletal system that wires the critical communication path with minimal functionalities, and then integrate iteratively and try to surface the risk as soon as possible. So these were some of the process recommendations. Now let's talk about some structural recommendations. The first is encapsulate likely changes. There should be well defined modules with separation of concerns and well defined information hiding. Second is use known patterns and use known tactics. So, whatever quality attributes you care about, always use known pattern and use known tactics unless your requirements are truly unprecedented. The third is avoid vendor lock-in at a versional granularity, which means if you really want to depend upon a particular vendor software, at least try to isolate to a level that if the vendor updates the version of the system, it doesn't impact your system too much and you are able to still continue ahead with the updated version of the system. Don't hard code for exact versional level granularity. The fourth is separate the producers from the consumers. It encourages a clean data flow and it encourages good amount of testability of your system. The fifth is don't encourage one-to-one module to component mapping. See, module is a representation of your system, and component in a way is a runtime implementation of your system. So don't map your modules to your components one to one because they seldomly align with each other. One is a static thing and one is a runtime thing. The sixth point is make processes to processor alignment kind of fluid, which means your processes should be defined that they can run on any processor and they should not be bound to a particular processor. The seventh point is put a constraint on the communication styles, which means there should be small and consistent set of ways in which components interact with each other to reduce accidental complexity. And the eighth point is localize contention. Identify narrow resource contention areas and define and maintain their resolution policies. So these were some of the structural recommendations. So how to use this information in practice? First of all, start with your business goals, then move to the qualities of the system that matter for you, and then define your structures, and then tie each of the quality to a particular kind of structure. The second is pick a dominant structure for your system, but then link it to the other structures as well. Third is document only that structure that pays for itself. How will it pay for itself? By helping your implementation teams and by defining the constraints and in other forms that we talked in this video. Fourth is continuously evaluate, which means if the environment or constraints change, reassess your architecture before it becomes a hell to make changes. So friends, in this video we learned about the software architecture and how a software architecture is a set of structures, elements, relations and their properties, and how it lets us reason about the behavior and qualities of the system. So for representing the structure we use views, and then amongst all the possible structures we choose a dominant structure to deliver our most important quality attributes, and then we use the commonly talked about patterns to document our designs, to document other things that really matter, and then we evaluate early and we build on that. We also build incrementally and we reevaluate whenever required. An undocumented architecture may exist, but it is very risky because it only lives in the head of your chief architect. We should choose structures intentionally We should communicate them clearly and let your design earn its keep in every day of the implementation of the project. So friend, in this series we will be talking about software architecture. Stay tuned for more videos on this topic, and please show us your love. Please show us your support by liking this video, by subscribing to our channel, and please, we would love to hear from you. How did you like this video? Any feedback from you? How should we improve upon this? And your general feedback about this video, we'll love to hear from you. Thanks a lot for watching, and stay tuned.